As a leader, you influence everyone you interact with, whether you intend to or not. It's what we call the leadership shadow. If you aren't aware of your shadow or aren't intentional about how you interact with others, you are likely casting a shadow that limits your leadership influence. The secret is in your values as a leader. In this episode, I sit down with John Miner to talk about how you can move from accidental to intentional influence through value-based leadership. This episode is longer than usual because it's from an excerpt from an extended conversation I recently had with John. I've included chapter markers in the show notes to help you navigate the content. And pay attention to the end where we talk about an upcoming training on value-based leadership. Let's jump in. Welcome to this episode of the Modern Leadership Solutions podcast. Today we're talking about your leadership shadow, and I have a guest with me today. I want to introduce to you John Miner with Collaboration Unlimited and Collaborative Learning. John, why don't you, before we get started, how about you introduce yourself a little bit, tell us a little bit about your company and the areas of work.
Sure, be happy to do that, Tom. I've been at this for a long time. I'm afraid I have to admit that I've been at work for about 50 years now, but still enjoying what I do. I started out like you did as an engineer and did some engineering for a few years until I decided that I was really a lot more interested in people than I was in the task of engineering. And so I very early in my career got into some management positions. And my work involved, initially doing some electrical design for commercial and industrial facilities, and later on jumping to the other side of the meter and working for electric utilities the rest of my career. And my progression was into management of technical functions and then eventually CEO roles. And then along the way, I also did consulting, which I really enjoyed doing. It fit in with a couple of my positions as a part-time opportunity. And then I actually went to work for a couple of national consulting firms, mostly in the arena of management consulting, where my technical background was useful, but not really the main focus of what we did. So from that, I leapt into my own business, Collaborative Learning and Collaboration Unlimited, which I formed in 1995. And our company, the two names mean something. Collaboration, of course, is our hallmark way of working with clients and with people that we educate in our continuing education programs. And under Collaborative Learning, we offer a range of both in-person and online programs. Mostly, but not exclusively, to people in the utility industry, some technical and a lot in management and leadership. And then through Collaboration Unlimited, we offer consulting services, things like working with governing boards on policy development and improvement of the organization's governance. And then we also offer program or consulting services related to strategic planning, organizational performance, change management, and the like.
Along the way, you've developed a particular leadership curriculum that I think would be of interest to our listeners. Maybe you could describe that a little bit?
Yeah, could I maybe first back up a little bit more and give you some of my own background that led to that point? The model was actually developed after I had formed my consulting company, and where we chose to go to work. There were 3 or 4 of us that just got together to see what common interests we had. And among these was leadership, and more particularly servant leadership. So we were interested in seeing if we could add our own thoughts and ideas to what already is an abundant supply of leadership models and materials. We felt very strongly that a good leader had all of the dimensions of leadership that are shown in this diagram here. We were fortunate to be able to make that into a name that we called Access Leadership, where each one of the letters actually stands for something. And the idea of access leadership is that a good leader is accessible and that a good leader also has access to all of the abundant talent and other resources of the organization on which to draw. It's not all about the leader. It's more about the leader in the context of the organization and all that it provides. Before getting into that anymore, what I wanted to say was one of the things in my own leadership development that I think is significant as I look back on it is the fact that I was moved into leadership positions very early in my career. So I was a CEO at, I think, age 32, and I found myself supervising people who were mostly 10, 20, even 30 years older than I was. And it was very clear that I wasn't going to outdo them in terms of knowledge, skills, and experience, which they really didn't need from me. But that was a realization I had to come to. What I could really contribute was what we tend to refer to as the soft side of leadership, which is really not soft at all. It's hard, very, very difficult. And that is looking at the values and the leadership style that is most effective in an organization. Um, in my first position as a CEO, one of the things I did, because I felt a need for it myself, was pull all of the managers together, and we basically created a written principles of management and leadership for our organization, which today I recognize as a set of core values. Back then, we didn't call it that. It was more about how do we want to work together and how do we want to be known as a leadership team. This access model then kind of grows out of that recognition that it's really important to be well-grounded in these essential dimensions of leadership. And the two that are most relevant to what we're discussing today are the top two: awareness and character, which we'll get into a little bit.
For those of you that are listening either on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, don't have the benefit of seeing it on YouTube, maybe you could just quickly describe the 6 components of access.
Yes, that's right. So the model is access, and the letters are standing for the dimensions of awareness, character, community, empowerment, service, and sustainability. And in each one of those dimensions of leadership, there are some leadership commitments that we get into in more detail. For example, under character, which is kind of central to our topic today, it's about the leader driving values and meeting expectations for ethical behavior all around, and by ensuring a respectful work environment for all.
You say that every leader casts a shadow, whether they intend to or not. Why is leaving that influence to default so risky?
Yeah, great question. First of all, good leaders are intentional about establishing the values that they believe in and communicating those to others, and then following through on them, mostly by the way in which they conduct themselves. And not only that, but good leaders, they're not going to leave the development of those values to chance. They'll put some effort into stating what those values are. And by that, we don't mean just naming them like we have integrity around here, but being a lot more specific about what integrity means in the context of the organization and of each person in it.
And so what would you say is the one of the big risks of not being intentional with your values and your culture?
Well, I think the biggest risk is that you're going to end up with people in the organization who are not acting in the same general direction. In other words, they're not seeing these overarching values that help them decide how to perform work or to communicate with clients and customers. It's all going to be more transactional, and that doesn't really do what the leader needs in terms of being able to establish a culture that will provide that kind of guidance without the leader having to be directly involved and in providing, rules and regulations and edicts and getting into an enforcement type of approach.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and we've talked about this as we've taught this before, um, in that if you're not intentional with the values and the culture, that you will establish a culture whether you mean to or not.
That's right. It's there. It's going to happen. It will either define itself in ways that are maybe not productive, or the leader can play a role in shaping that culture.
Where do you think that leaders often underestimate the effect of the shadow?
I think mostly it comes down to the leaders not seeing themselves as others see them. And so a big part of self-awareness is recognizing that uh, others are looking at you and at the organization from their own perspective. And as an aware leader, you have to be able to seek out and receive the feedback that will give you a full picture of that impact that you're having.
What would you say is one of the costs if you have a leader that doesn't want to reflect on an impact?
I think probably the biggest cost is that the leader doesn't grow or develop. And then I would say too, it's also harmful to those around the leader that they don't get the opportunity to develop as they would or should either.
So I guess the big takeaway here is understanding that leadership is never neutral, and there's no such thing as not influencing, that you're always having some influence. That contributes into this idea of the quality of the shadow that the leader casts, and that's where we start to talk about values. And in your courses, you describe the values as these energetic containers of our intentions. How do positive versus maybe fear driven values change a leader's impact?
Yeah, that term energetic containers is kind of interesting, isn't it? We don't typically think about our values in that way, but the truth of the matter is that positive values do, in fact, generate energy and enthusiasm, whereas potentially limiting values do the very opposite. And so, as a good leader, what we want to do is drive out fear. We don't want to be leading from a standpoint of fear where the people that we're working with have uh, even more anxiety or uncertainty about the future than they do anyway. Our role is to emphasize those positive values that we can all get around and support together. Um, Positive values, just to put some labels to that, would be things like and anything that would build on interpersonal connections and trust. So when we say values like empowerment and cooperation, personal growth, these are all values that when people hear them, they are likely to be energized and want to know more about them and how to carry them out. Conversely, potentially limiting values would be things that drive separation and mistrust. Values often are perceived as something that are kind of nebulous and uh, hard to recognize. And in fact, if you don't do something more than just assign a name, that may be true. So we like to be exhibiting those values that you want the organization to stand for. And it's real easy to get out of sync if you're not intentionally thinking about that.
It's just like any good idea, any good learning. If you don't put action to it, it doesn't really accomplish anything good or bad. But that depending on those underlying values, two leaders can be doing can say the same thing, but the underlying value can change how that lands with their teams. So, what would be an example of that?
Well, Tom, take for example, a team leader. One team leader might, in delegating tasks to the team, be vague and unclear about what is to be done and the results to be expected. But then later on, after the team starts doing the work, comes back in at a very high level of detail, asking questions about what the team has done and why, and really without having previously established any frame of reference for that kind of communication. So the team members in that situation are going to feel frustrated in their efforts. They're not really going to be trusting the leader because they've gotten very little guidance when they needed it. But at a time when they don't feel they needed it, they're getting interference with the work that they're trying to carry out.
And that speaks highly of this character issue that we talk about in the access model. And trust alone isn't built strictly on character. There's a certain need for competence, but as we get into that, why does the competence without that character eventually fail leaders?
Well, it really does come back to trust, which I mentioned in the previous example, that, competence alone does not build trust, and trust is the leader's most essential aspect. Uh, this model of trust building, which has been prepared by Richard Barrett, is an answer, I think, to that question. It shows both competence, that is your capability to do something, as well as your proven track record of results, as only half of the trust picture. The other half being character, where you trust in the other person's intentions and integrity in ways that are shown in more detail by some values statements as shown in the diagram. For example, if your intent is openness or honesty, transparency, really thoughtful caring for those people who are impacted by your work, or integrity being your sense of fairness and authenticity, and really being an honest broker of information that you're entrusted to handle. Without those character aspects, competency doesn't go far enough in terms of building trust.
Where do you think, for those leaders that don't really make that connection yet between character and competence, where do you think they tend to overinvest in their competence?
I think often it's by being perfectionists. I can speak to that because I am one. I'm a recovering perfectionist, or at least I think so. And that's an especial problem for engineers and accountants and others who have come up in professions where accuracy is very important, accuracy and consistency.
For the leaders that don't understand this side of it, they may be very, very capable as far as their competence goes, but it explains why these otherwise technically strong leaders still lose people. How could you as a leader spot these gaps in what you say you value and then what you actually put into practice?
So before getting right into the answer to that, when just to kind of wrap up the content on character, what character means is really congruence between your stated values, things that you say you believe in, and what you actually do. That's also often referred to as authenticity in a leader. So to the question of how can you spot gaps in that, usually that means you've got to train yourself to step back from situations, some of your daily actions that are kind of almost automatic to you, and ask those questions again from the perspective of others who may be with you and observing you. What are they seeing in your actions? Do your actions, your behaviors, your attitudes and actions together really align with your values, or is there some disconnect? You may be able to recognize some of that on your own, but again, this is a great opportunity for a leader to show another important quality, and that is vulnerability in asking others what they see and being willing to take in that information without judgment.
That takes a lot of trust to be able to do that, for sure. This should be part of the culture they build, that they can get this feedback on a continual basis.
That's right. And part of their own self-discipline, I think, Tom, to stay in the moment as much as they can and to be much more aware in real time of what's going on around them.
Yeah. And I think by making it an ongoing process, it's something that you do regularly, that goes a long way into building trust with your team, because your good intentions won't necessarily build the trust. It's that pattern of constantly being able to ask for feedback and being open to that communication without, as you say, without any negative connotation showing up from that.
Yeah. Well, the way you put it just now does take us back to that character competency model, maybe a little bit in reverse. So it's not just enough to say that you have good intentions. You have to develop maybe some new competencies that you haven't developed before to fill out your own leadership role.
Yeah, it should be an ongoing process. I mean,
Yeah.
we always say that leadership is really a journey, not a destination. And so that this should be something where you're always learning and always growing and always developing.
Yeah. And as we're often told, practicing over and over establishes patterns of behavior. And if those patterns of behavior are consistent with your values, then they are automatically trust building.
And so understanding that this concept of leadership growth is really a journey, why does this values work matter at each stage in your development?
That's a really good question. And, if you don't mind, I'd like to be able to answer that by talking from a values model. And I'll describe this to those who can't see it. This is another model developed by Richard Barrett. He's developed really some of the world's most profound tools for measuring organizational cultures and leadership values. What some of you are seeing now, in which I'll describe to others, is a 7-level values model. So in this particular model, the first level is, in fact, physical survival. Level 2 is emotional relationships. Level 3 is emotional self-esteem. In an individual where those needs are more or less met, there are then other questions, more profound questions, like, is this all there is? Or why am I really here? Which leads one into level 4 called mental transformation. And you may stay there a while trying to figure things out, but typically most people, when given that opportunity, will emerge into a more spiritual or service-minded level of values 5, 6, and 7, which Barrett has named internal cohesion of people, making a difference, and selfless service. Now, the truth is that this is something we all grow into. And even though we may, at one point in our life, have spent time dealing with things that serve those higher level values, at any point, something could happen that would drive us right back down to survival. Think of a health crisis or loss of employment, any other difficulty that gets you thinking not about how do I serve others, but how do I survive? So it's a very useful model in terms of laying out the opportunities that we all have to become fully fulfilled human beings, but it also realistically portrays a journey that we take, which is not necessarily linear. It's very seldom that we're going to go from the bottom of this model to the top.
And I know that we've both been from the bottom to the top of this value stack, with the understanding this is really once again, contributing to this awareness. It's good to understand this concept of values and this particular way of laying them out. I think this goes a long way in helping to understand why many leaders feel successful but but unfulfilled,
Hmm.
and also explain how your focus can shift as you go through your career, as your values shift.
And the more time you spend in a management or leadership role, the more of your satisfaction and fulfillment really is derived from what others do. It's not all about what you do, but it may be about how you have supported others to grow and become more fulfilled themselves. That, of course, is the essence of what we call servant leadership.
You've got some training that's upcoming, as of this date of this publishing. It's not very long away. It's coming up pretty quickly, and I'd like to talk just briefly about how it helps leaders align the values with what they do every day, and get some specifics
Sure.
about the training itself.
Yeah, this program that we have coming up called Values Based Leadership is an online program, but it's very, very much engaging in terms of having opportunities for interaction with the instructors as well as with other participants in the program to work together. And in addition to reviewing some of the basics of these models that we've shared with you here, we challenge those leaders to take a step in the direction of creating values, naming values, and then working with their leadership teams to describe in more detail what those values mean. So the kind of coaching process that you go through is, again, you want to get beyond just saying, well, we value integrity around here. We want to explain, why is integrity an important value? Why do we believe it's important enough to be named, not in general, but to us specifically in our organization at this point in time? And then the next step beyond that is to say, all right, we are convinced that this is an important value, one that we need to follow. Then what does that look like in action? What does that look like when the CEO is showing integrity? What does it look like when the customer service representative is showing integrity? And always from the perspective of those who are on the outside looking in, not from our perspective inside the organization. That's a different viewpoint entirely. The one that's most important is how are we being perceived as an organization and as leaders by others.
What are the dates of this online training, and how can people get involved in this?
Tom, the course is January 14th and 15th. It is an online course, as I mentioned, and we try to set a time that works for all the.
I'll put some information in the show notes, and I'll have a link up here for the people that want to click on that. I've been through this course, and I know that it's a great course, not just in the content, but just in the way that it's presented. It's a very informative, a lot of opportunity for discussion and interaction. So that makes it a lot better than just sitting there and watching a webinar.
That I was going to make that point that if you sign up for that, we hope you do. Be intentional. We've talked about that. Be intentional about engaging in the content and with the course instructors and the others taking the course. You could sit back and just listen, but it won't give you what we want you to get out of it, and it won't give you what you need. We provide lots of opportunities for self-reflection. You can make notes to yourself. We have group work involved, and you really can come away, I think, with a good starter kit for actually doing this work on your own.
Yeah, I think so. So, John, I'd love to sit here and talk all afternoon on this, but in wrapping this up, what would you say is one step that a leader can take right now to start leading more intentionally?
I would personalize it, maybe even take yourself out of the work environment and just think about yourself as an individual and name three values that are personally important to you and how you came to hold these values. Do this on your own and then ask yourself, in addition to these are the values that I've named, how did you come to believe that they were important and why do you believe they're important to you? Keep it personal. As a second step, you could start doing some thinking on the question, with each one of these values, what is it that I'm intentionally doing to live up to that value so that other people who are with me, know me, can get that value even if I don't tell them what it is. That sounds like an easy task, but you could spend some time on that. If you only have time to do one value, just do one, but work it all the way through as I suggested.
So as we wrap this up, John, is there anything you'd like to close with? Any closing comments you'd like to leave us with?
I think we've had a pretty thorough discussion on the topic. I appreciate your good questions and hope that we've been able to raise awareness about the importance of values and how you can get started down the path of making them more relevant to you.
Yes, absolutely. And so in wrapping this up, I'd just like to remind everybody that leadership isn't just about what we do. It's about who we're becoming while we do it. Thank you for joining us today, John. Thank you for this conversation. We look forward to more in the future. We may have you back to talk about access at some point because there's a whole lot we could unpack. But for now, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.